What the Speak, Episode 8. Hey, you. Can you advance that slide right there?
Do you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch? If not, these expert discussions and insider tips can help you right now, today. Welcome to the What the Speak podcast. I'm your host, Brian Kelly.
Struggling with feeling comfortable in front of an audience when you present? Or maybe you're confident, but you have difficulty stumbling over filler words like and ah. Well, you can start kicking ass today by signing up for our weekly VIP updates. As a bonus, you'll also receive 11 free tips that will uncover 6 psychological secrets to public speaking, plus 5 tips on how to stop using filler words. Go to whatthespeak.com/VIP. David Newman is the author of the #1 Amazon bestseller titled Do It Marketing, and he's been at this game for quite a while and knows speaking inside and out. He's also helped hundreds of other speakers up their game and master their skills. Some of the things that we cover in this discussion are how to offer tremendous takeaway value for your audience, tips on keeping a high energy persona, and the trick to being humorous without trying to be the next Comedy Central star. Bottom line, we talk about some very useful methods, and I'm thrilled to have David here on the show. So David, you've been presenting for over 20 years now, and one thing that I've heard people rave about is the fact that you're a speaker who offers tremendous takeaway value. So when I go to a presentation that you deliver, I can immediately walk out of that room and I've got, let's say, my 3 top takeaways that I can go back to my office or back to my team with to really implement. So let's go behind the scenes. I really want to see, take a peek behind a David Newman presentation and see what you've got going on. Is that cool?
There it is. It's behind the scenes.
Awesome.
We are totally doing it. It's all right here. It's all right here. No, that'd be great. That's awesome.
Cool.
Great approach. I like it.
All right. So the first question I've got for you is, how do you go about the process of really lacing your presentations with humor, stories, as well as practical examples?
Well, let me take the humor part of that aside because the answer is different than the stories and examples.
Okay.
So the stories and examples, I actually cheat. I hate to tell you, but I totally cheat in that I don't sit down with a clean piece of paper and then write the speech or write the seminar or the keynote or the program. I do a tremendous amount of writing, and many speakers obviously do a tremendous amount of writing. So my starting point is not a blank piece of paper. My starting point is that particular audience, that particular conference or association or company or group, and figuring out what have I already written. So where do I already have the stories, the examples, the metaphors, some of the mechanics of what I want to share with them? Where have I written about that before? And I could have written about it before in one of my books. I usually will go to my blog first. Yeah. So for the folks that are blogging, I think your blog is a huge repository of speaking rocket fuel. Now, it still needs to be processed, and I think, Brian, will talk about that a little bit. But, that's where people say, well, I don't know what to talk about. I don't have stories or examples or funny little vignettes. I said, well, don't look to your speaking. Don't look to your PowerPoint. Look to your writing. Look to what you've already written, already experienced, already processed as a thought leader in one format, and then use that writing as the springboard to put that into a seminar, put that into a keynote, put that into a speech. So that's where a lot of my content comes from, is that it's quote unquote pre-written, meaning I've already written about it somewhere else in some other media or medium. And then the humor is a separate issue.
Okay.
And we can talk about humor next if you want.
Yeah, I mean, just to kind of recap on what you said, I think the really good thing that you're describing is that it's not like this is canned material and that you're just pulling it out and, for group A, you're delivering the same thing as you would group B, but you've got things that help you be more efficient with what you're preparing. And then that way you can focus on the more finer details of the content to tailor it specifically to that audience.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And, just like the tailor, tailoring is a great metaphor. The tailor is not sitting there knitting the cloth.
Right.
The tailor has the cloth on the bolt, and it's the tailor's job to cut and trim and fit from the existing cloth and make you a beautiful suit.
Perfect. Okay, so let's talk about humor now. That's something that I think a lot of folks, and I'd say even myself included, have struggled with because we think we have to be a comedian. And having humor in your presentation is not the same as being a comedian or a stand-up comedian, let's say. So talk about your process and how you, bring funny stories, anecdotes, whatever, into your presentation.
Absolutely. Well, so you're totally right. When we talk about adding humor to a speech or adding humor to a program, we are not talking about telling jokes. And we are not talking about you being the next big thing on Comedy Central. So, to me, the source of my humor, again, you asked about kind of like, in my world, in my personal experience. My personal experience is I do not ever try to be funny in a speech. Now, what's interesting is people think that my speeches are very funny and very humorous because my first goal is to be human. And so by being human, by being my natural sort of offstage personality, just magnified a little bit bigger, I naturally find funny things in the stories that I tell. I naturally find funny things in some of the audience reaction. So it's very, very important to be in the moment. So when you're speaking, when you're presenting, doesn't matter if it's 20 people or 200 people or 2,000 people, be in the moment and funny things will emerge. We have all kinds of technical craziness that happens on stage, microphones cutting out, pieces of furniture falling over. If you handle it like a human, right, the natural humor in that situation emerges. Now, more importantly, though, so that's sort of situational humor.
Right.
And, let's say nothing bad happens to you on stage. Well, then, you give a very straight, not funny talk. No, of course not. I think you need to look for moments in your speech and in your program where you can use self-deprecating humor. So humor pointed at yourself about how little you knew, how big of a mistake you made, a misjudgment, an error, a presumption, an assumption, any of those sorts of things. So where have you stumbled? If you're a leadership speaker, where have you stumbled in leadership? If you're a sales speaker, where have you stumbled in sales? If you're a health and wellness speaker, where have you stumbled in your own health and wellness? And so take yourself off the pedestal. That's another great source of humor. And that also helps build a relationship with the audience. If you put yourself out there as somebody who's perfect and who's never made a mistake, and who's never been in your audience's shoes, the room suddenly gets colder. And you'll feel the temperature, not the physical temperature, but you'll feel the emotional temperature start to drop. And people go, well, I don't like him so much because he's perfect. He's never made these mistakes. And then the last thing, Brian, about humor, because I get this comment all the time. I was just doing a seminar for a nonprofit group in Connecticut, and several folks came up to me on the break and afterwards and said, oh, are you a stand-up comedian? Like, do you do stand-up comedy on the side? And I said, no, I don't. And I'll tell you why. It's better to be a mildly funny speaker than it is to be a mildly funny comedian. So if you set yourself up to be Mr. or Ms. hysterical laughs and stand-up comedy and your material doesn't work, you're sunk.
Right.
If you don't try at all to be funny and let the natural humor evolve out of your humanity, out of your storytelling, out of your self-deprecating humor, people will think you're hysterical. So it maybe one soundbite, one takeaway on the humor piece is under-promise, over-deliver.
Yeah. Well, I want to dig into this just a little bit more. So I think that you've offered some valuable insights into how to incorporate humor in. Let me ask you this. Let's say maybe you've got a funny story. Maybe you were pulled over by a police officer for speeding or going through a red light. In some way, shape, or form, you've got a story about that situation that applies to what you're speaking about, and maybe as a metaphor or some type of explanation that fits what your content is.
Sure.
Have you ever found yourself where you can accentuate parts of that story? You know, maybe it's not quite as funny, but you can go in there and just, you know, accentuate little aspects of it. Have you had any experience with that?
Oh, totally. Well, and let's get specific around that word accentuate, because I'm a big believer that when you tell a story, whether it's a humorous story or not, but to effectively tell a story, you don't just tell it, you relive it. So in the reliving, let's go with your example. Let's go with your example of being pulled over by a cop. So when you're reliving that story, you're playing both parts, right? You're playing you and you're playing the cop. So if the cop comes up to your window, you might even use some body language and, you know. So the cop came up to my window. Sort of lean down as if you're leaning into a car window. Yep. And pausing. I mean, pausing and the way you use your face can also be, you know, so what kind of face was that state trooper making? You know, did he have like the big glasses on, and did he, you know? And so audiences pick up on that, and they pick up on, okay, now David's playing a character.
Right.
And so they'll go with you. It's almost like a little sort of flashback in a movie that you're reliving that episode. So take part in both roles, use your body. So, you know, physicalize like this, the way you lean over. If you're in the car, maybe you're like this going,
yep.
You know, and so all of those things help. Now, the story, of course, you have to have a little bit of sensitivity towards things like timing, towards things like language. So, you know, there's the old joke about not joke, it's the old truth, the old truism about Jerry Seinfeld, that he will spend 2 hours taking a punchline from 8 words to 5 words.
Yeah.
So things like that are important. You know, are they as important for a speaker as opposed to a professional stand-up comedian who gets paid, you know, millions and bazillions of dollars? No. You know, do you have to have a little bit of self-education about timing and pacing and voices and gestures and so forth? Sure. But, you know, kids are great at this. You ask a kid to retell a story, and it's like, well, and then the principal came into the lunchroom, and he kind of looked like this. And, he, you know, and so kids are brilliant at it. We forget, or we let that go. Because like, oh, well, that's not cool. You know, I can't tell the story like a 3rd grader. Sure you can. In fact, you can and you should tell it like a 3rd grader. So relive it as if you're a little kid. You're filled with wonder. You're filled with curiosity. And you really want to convey exactly what happened because you're reliving that moment. You're not just retelling it like an adult.
Brilliant. I love it. All right. So let's move along. The next thing I wanted to dive into with you is in regards to how you incorporate interactive how-to content in your presentation. So when I go to a David Newman presentation, I'm not just going to be sitting there being talked at during the duration of the presentation. I actually get to be involved in what it is that you're conveying and process it internally. So how do you do that? When you sit down to think about what you're going to be presenting, you know, how do you incorporate those elements in?
Well, I'm going to give you a short, easy, cheating answer, and then I'm going to give you a little bit more in-depth, complicated answer.
All right.
The short, in-depth cheating answer, and you guys can do this immediately, and you should. The word you, Y-O-U. I use the word you a lot when I speak. So my expertise that I speak on is small business marketing, thought leadership marketing, speaking, publishing, et cetera, et cetera. I say, let's talk about you and your business. Imagine if you were to write a book. Imagine there's the next time you give a program and you give a presentation, the next time that you're speaking to a prospect, say this language, ask these questions, you know, put this in your agreement. So the whole time people are looking around going, oh my God, he's talking to me. Yeah. He's talking to me about my business, about my professional practice, about my, you know, he's talking to me. So use the word you and people will think that it really is about them. So that's not interactive. That's audience focused. That's audience centric. Now, interactivity and making that really an experience instead of, as you said, a lecture, That also takes just a little bit of study, a little bit of preparation. I'll give you a couple ideas that can get you going right now. I love to take a break. So I'll do a little bit of content, and then I'll take a break. And sometimes I call these a tweet break. And so here's how a tweet break works. No one has to have a smartphone. No one has to have a laptop. We do live, quote-unquote, tweeting in the room. I say, imagine we're on Twitter. And for those of you that don't know Twitter, because I talk to some older audiences, they're like, Twitter, what? Tweets and twits and who? And, you know, that means they're 37 years old instead of 22. Anyway, I say live tweeting works like this. Right, based on what we just talked about for the last 5 to 7 minutes, write down one sound bite. Write down one quote that you are going to apply to your business. And so people will write down some of my sound bites, for example, are experts win on value, generalists die on price. Another one might be, so someone else writes down easy, effortless, and enjoyable, because I make a point about marketing should be easy, effortless, and enjoyable. Anyway, that could be 200 people, and they all just wrote down their tweet. And I tell people, by the way, if you do have a smartphone and you do want to tweet, feel free to tweet. My Twitter handle's @DNewman, and I tell them how to do that and so forth. But then I say, okay, around the room, let's hear some tweets. And so I get to pick up what resonated with them. Mm-hmm. I also get to customize the rest of the program on the fly. So I do more of the, I'll dig deeper into a topic that they're more interested in, and I'll sort of leave off the topics that really nobody tweeted about, that no one really resonated with. But so that's one way to do it. So I do a live tweet. Second thing that I do sometimes, I'll put a big giant question mark on my PowerPoint slide. And this is great because it doesn't lock you into any particular question. Yeah. But I will say, the conference organizers here did a fabulous job. They went to endless lengths. They ran computer programs and all sorts of, artificial intelligence. So you are sitting next to your strategic learning and application partner. You didn't know this sitting down, but you are sitting next to your strategic learning application partner. Please turn to your strategic learning application partner to your left and have them answer this question. When it comes to whatever the topic is, right? My topics, again, are marketing related, but you can use this for anything. When it comes to blank, what's the one thing you wish you would have done differently? What's one thing you wish you would have done differently? Other kind of questions I can sometimes bake in there. Name one thing that has worked consistently. So if we're doing a sales seminar, right? If it comes to prospecting, turn to your strategic learning application partner and tell them what's the one thing that has worked consistently. Now, again, room could be 20 people, 200, 2,000, doesn't matter. You're having them, one turns to the other and says, well, for me, it's always been referrals. Well, for me, it's always been postcards. And then they talk, and then you bring them back. You ask one question, and it's very important to focus it. So it's not like, share what has worked. Share what has worked. They're going to lunch on you. They're gone for an hour. Right. Share one thing that has always worked. Share one thing that you would change. Share one thing that if your prospects knew about your business would help you close twice as many sales. So it's these little thought-provoking, kind of mind-bending, mind-teaser questions. They're engaging with each other. And here's the last point on this. Yep. A lot of times speakers say, well, my session's interactive. And what they mean is, I have the audience interact with me. Right. Guess what? Audience doesn't always want to interact with you. Audience wants to interact with each other. Absolutely. They're in the room there with 100, 150, 200, 2,000 of their closest friends, peers, colleagues, professional associates, advocates, allies, resources, referral partners. They need to get to know each other. So when you're facilitating a conversation, don't facilitate a conversation with yourself. Facilitate a conversation among them. Yeah. And then you know what? At the end of the program, they go, I like that guy. He was brilliant. Why? Because he let me and my table have a great conversation.
Yeah, I think it's great because it's not forcing people to converse in kind of an awkward way. It's really just allowing the opportunity for dialogue and interaction with, like you said, the person that's next to them. And it's very casual, it's very informal, but yet people walk away loving it because they're able to reflect on the content that was delivered to them versus them just sitting there, getting talked at for an hour or 45 minutes or whatever it is. So, okay, well, David, we've got just 3 or 4 minutes left. One last question for you. When you deliver a presentation, how do you keep, this high energy persona? When you're going for, let's say, 60 minutes, you're really good at that. What type of tip or tips would you give somebody who would love to be able to not fall into, monotone dialogue or, shuffling back and forth on the stage? What do you do to keep that high energy?
If I said caffeine and cough drops, would that be a good answer?
Yes, but
lots of caffeine.
In addition to that,
I think, but you raise a great point because a lot of speech coaches, a lot of people at Toastmasters and presentation skills coaches will tell you that you've got 4 vocal tools, right? You've got pitch, pace, volume, and variety.
Right.
So like pausing, rate, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I would say that you've got a fifth lever that's even more important than the first 4, which is energy management. And energy management, again, think about, I hate to keep going back, but you planted the seed now of the stand-up comedians. And I did take a stand-up comedy class, so I'm just knowledgeable enough to be dangerous.
Right.
A stand-up comedian will start the set with his second best joke. Go through the whole set, 30, 45 minutes, whatever it is, hour. And he will end with his best joke. So energy management, draw a curve. Start at around a 7.5 or an 8.
Yeah.
Now, with someone like me, who's kind of frantic anyway, if I stayed at 7.5, 8, 9, and 10 throughout the whole program, I would irritate everybody. So I have to go down in the middle. I should have gone down in the middle of this interview. I stayed around 9 because I like you. But seriously, so you have to have a conversation with your audience. And then during your stories, you can again raise it up. You can again get more animated. During a key point that you're especially excited about or it's especially important to their success, then you can start to go a little bit faster and start to raise your volume and start to gesture more wildly. Yes, even on video. But then you got to bring it down again. Yeah. So the highest compliment that I've ever gotten, Brian, is I'm talking to a group of 150, 200 people on the evaluation form or in a very nice email or a letter that I get. They say, David, your session was so relaxed, it felt like I was talking to you one-on-one. So when you're, this is really the key of that energy management. Is if you were having lunch with somebody, perhaps my own exception, being accepted, when I have lunch with someone, I am yelling at them for an hour. You, who's more of a normal person, when you're having lunch with someone, you're like, hey, buddies! So it's exciting at the beginning. You're talking about the family, the kids, the dog, the new car, the vacation, whatever you're doing. There's highs and lows during that conversation. Right. And then when you close, like, oh, it's so great to see you. Give them a big hug. Give them a big handshake. Yeah, awesome. Great. Okay. Well. So energy management. Think in terms of energy management and then exciting at the beginning, exciting at the end, conversation in between. But a natural, exciting, fun, engaging conversation, not boring, monotone, dry. Nobody wants to listen to this any more than they want to listen to me rant and rave like I usually do.
So balance. It's all about balance and providing that variety.
Yes.
I think that's great. Like you said, there's the 4 things that we usually are taught. This fifth element or lever really, I think is a powerful tool. So thanks for sharing that.
You bet. Well, and just one quick point on that, let's take volume, for example. Volume can be high or low. So with energy management, think about what does an energetic whisper sound like, right? When you talk about pace being fast and slow, what does a high energy, slow section of your speech sound like? So it's all kinds of interesting combinations. Start playing with that in your next program that you're preparing for, and you'll do miles better. It'll be a fun experiment.
Love it. All right, David. Well, thank you again for your time. It's been a blast.
Brian, awesome to be here. Thanks for having me.
All righty. If you liked what today's guest had to share in our discussion, you may want to grab an audio copy of their latest book for free by going to WTSaudiobook.com. That's WTSaudiobook.com.
All right, here we go with the outro.
Thanks so much for joining us today on What to Speak. Be sure to visit whattospeak.com for show notes on every episode and to sign up for our email list to stay updated on resources that'll help you kick ass when you speak, present, or pitch.